Welcome to Turkish Spotlight Secrets, the channel where the glossy facade of celebrity life is gently lifted and the quieter, truer stories are given room to breathe. If you're new here, hit subscribe, tap join if you're able to support independent coverage, and leave a comment so your voice is part of this ongoing conversation. Let's begin. There is a quiet shift happening around one of Turkey's most recognizable leading men, and the movement is not theatrical but deeply human. For years, Akınözü seemed to carry a certain spark into every frame, buoyant, charming, that effortless magnetism audiences love to claim as their own. He could walk onto a set and make a moment feel inevitable. Yet those close to him say that the brightness of that persona is dimming by choice, not by loss. The energy that once rushed outward toward lights and microphones appears to be turning inward, toward something sturdier and less performative. Insiders describe a recent retreat that is both deliberate and profound. Schedules once packed with launches and red carpets have thinned. Meetings have been postponed. Cameras that used to find him almost daily are being allowed to search. This doesn't feel like a lull so much as a correction, an attempt to recalibrate a life whose public edges have been allowed to swallow the private core. It's a refusal to let the portrait crowd out the person. And then, there is Akın. Introduced to the public as both partner and peer, a presence whose radiance often echoed his. Their pairing was presented, for a time, as something seamless, two bright stars tracing one elegant trajectory. Placed side by side on magazine covers and behind velvet ropes, they looked like the answer to a brand manager's prayer. But away from the flashbulbs, those who witnessed the unedited moments tell a more complicated story, one marked by mismatch more than harmony. According to friends and colleagues who saw the couple beyond curated frames, the chemistry that looked perfectly scripted in front of cameras didn't always translate when the cameras were gone. What many interpreted as intimacy, some now describe as an exchange between a living man and a ready-made image. Ebru, they say carefully, seemed tethered at times to the glow around Akin, the access, the sheen, the effortless privilege that celebrity confers, more than to the fragile, restless human being inside that glow. The picture-perfect exterior may have been built to hold up under scrutiny, while the private reality struggled to breathe. People who study the mechanics of fame have warned for years that love stories forged in the blaze of the spotlight carry their own perils. When someone is admired primarily for the orbit around them, the lifestyle, the status haze, the mercurial charm that sells, it can turn them into a vessel for another person's hopes instead of a partner for their truths. Sources claim that, over time, Akin felt himself hardening into a role everyone recognized but few really knew. He grew uneasy with the applause he couldn't stop, the expectations he didn't set, the polished version of himself that seemed to draw more opportunities the less it resembled who he was on quiet mornings. Friends noticed the edges of fatigue first. In private, the exuberant storyteller became measured, a little distant, more often found alone with a notebook than holding court at a dinner. He stopped filling silences that didn't need filling. There were evenings when he would turn off the prepped lines and say, almost to himself, "Who am I when the monitors go black?" A longtime confidant shared, with more sadness than judgment. When that question stops being rhetorical, change becomes not just possible but urgent. The shift underway, we are told, hasn't come from a single thunderclap moment so much as a series of modest, cumulative decisions. He circled back to friendships that predate fame and to family routines that existed long before premieres. Invitations that once had to be accepted were suddenly optional. His online footprint, once a steady stream of shoots and brand tie-ins, began to condense, fewer spectacular posts, fewer orchestrated glimpses into a life that had started to feel like a production. For someone whose art and income have often depended on visibility, the choice to court quiet looks, from the outside, like an act of rebellion. While this inward turn was gathering momentum, the relationship with Ebru reportedly hit a sharper edge. Industry figures, ever attuned to what feels bankable and what feels precarious, started to recalibrate their strategies. Partnerships that had appeared locked turned tentative, campaigns that leaned on a certain story about the couple were paused or redirected. The narrative had slipped out of alignment with what advertisers knew how to sell. And when the script changes mid-scene, the fallout rarely divides evenly. People close to the situation frame the consequences for Abreu as substantial. Without the constant amplification that a partner's omnipresence can provide, the professional terrain looks different. The curated romance that was once an asset isn't quite the same currency. And beyond the spreadsheets and calendars, there is the human impact, the disorienting quiet after a long season of staging, the loneliness that creeps in when a tableau deconstructs and you're left sorting which parts were yours and which belonged to the role. Those who care about her emphasize that the confusion is real, the hurt not feigned, and that she is now negotiating a path that demands new footing. It would be easy, and wrong, to impose tidy morals on a messy human story. Relationships, especially the ones inspected through a magnifying glass, are both magnified and distorted by the gaze. When one person becomes a symbol, even for a little while, everyone ends up injured. Accounts circulating among those close to Akin hint at games of pressure and adherence to a shared image, not outright cruelty so much as a constant nudge to be the marketable version of himself, to keep the machine humming. But those same accounts also leave room for a kinder reading, two ambitious, talented people trying to make a life while surrounded by incentives that reward display over depth. If you listen to the softer voices around him, the plan for what comes next is less a career twist than a moral repositioning. There are murmurs of a new definition of success that would rather feel steady than look spectacular. Friends talk about smaller goals that sound almost radical in their simplicity, mornings that belong to him, dinners where the only audience is family, conversations not designed for a caption. And if he accepts a stage, perhaps it will be on terms that protect the person first and the image second. Observers who have seen him away from formal engagements describe a changed expression. There is a different rhythm to his smile, they say. It arrives later and lingers less, rendered honest by the absence of witnesses. Whether that inner recalibration will spark a new spark in his craft, something leaner, truer, more alive, or whether it signals a longer retreat from the more performative parts of fame remains, at this moment, an open question. What seems nearer to certain is that he is building a sturdier center and trying to live from it. We want Turkish Spotlight Secrets to be a dialogue that includes you, not a monologue that talks past you. What do you make of this kind of step back? Is it a brave antidote to burnout or an expensive gamble that dodges obligations? Which Turkish stars behind-the-scenes reality should we explore next with care and curiosity? Your thoughts steer the kinds of stories we chase and the tone with which we tell them, so don't hesitate to weigh in below. It's tempting, in moments like these, to wrap the narrative in neat conclusions. But human becoming is rarely neat. It doubles back. It contradicts itself. It asks for patience that audiences and algorithms rarely grant. Still, from the testimony available, one thread emerges with clarity: a refusal. A refusal to be consumed by the very machinery that cheered him on. A refusal to trade inner coherence for the brittle, exhausting currency of constant exposure. And somewhere inside that refusal might be a fragile kind of freedom, the chance to craft a life that is chosen, not packaged. For Akin Akınözü, those who know him insist the story is still being written. This current chapter is less spectacle and more scaffolding. It's a private rebuilding that may one day serve the public work, or it may simply serve the man. For Abreu Şahin, the next stretch may demand a recalibration of her own, one that finds strength and shape without relying on light that isn't hers. For those of us watching, the invitation is simple and hard at once. To look with curiosity but resist the rush to verdict, to remember that the images that sell are not the whole of a person. Before you go, tell us whose journey you want us to examine with the same attention and respect. Subscribe to Turkish Spotlight Secrets, press join if you can, and help keep this space independent, responsible, and bold enough to hold nuance. Your engagement allows us to keep telling stories that don't fit into headlines but still matter to the people living them. Thank you for staying with us. Until next time, stay observant, stay kind, and keep asking the questions that lead beyond the surface. And if you're wondering whether this transformation will end on a marquee or at a quiet table, know this: sometimes the most dramatic plot twist is the one that swaps applause for peace. That decision doesn't photograph well, but it can save a life from becoming a brand. Perhaps that is the point, not to vanish, but to emerge on one's own terms, even if that emergence is quieter than the world expects. The weeks ahead will tell us how this recalibration settles, whether the boundaries hold, whether the partnerships that remain can honor the person inside the performance, whether gentler choices can survive in a business built on noise. What we've been told suggests a man choosing the long arc over the quick spark, a woman taking stock of a future she can author from the ground up, and an audience learning to watch without demanding a show. If that sounds idealistic, maybe it is. But sometimes the only way to get to something true is to risk disappointing the scripts we've been handed. So yes, the contracts got reread, the planners got lighter, and the phone, at times, stayed face down. Yes, there were nights when the old rhythm called, when the room waited for a familiar performance. And yes, there were fractures and second guesses and the ache that comes with changing a pattern people have praised. But there was also relief, the relief of speaking in an unamplified voice and seeing who it still reaches. The relief of finding that not all lights are blinding, some simply warm the space you're in. If this is a pause, it is an intentional one. If it's a pivot, it aims toward a life that can hold, not just a role that can sell. Stay with us, because as this story unfolds, we'll follow it with the empathy and rigor it deserves. Not because scandal sells, but because people matter, even the ones we meet through screens. And as always, this is Turkish Spotlight Secrets, where the narrative is not the product, the person is.